The underdog's gambit. The Nexer Empire's Grand Admiral had seen many things in his centuries of military service, but nothing had prepared him for the report now floating before his 4 eyes. He read it again, blinked all eyes in sequence, and fought the urge to molt from sheer frustration. "Explain to me," he chittered to his strategic advisory board, "how a single human vessel, barely larger than a civilian transport, managed to rout an entire battle group." The assembled advisors shifted uncomfortably in their hover chairs. Finally, one brave soul activated her vocal resonators. "The humans are calling it the CSS Trickster, Excellence. It appears to be an experimental ship." Experimental. The Grand Admiral's scales flickered with irritation. "Our battle group was defeated by a test vessel." "That's the peculiar part, Excellence. The ship itself isn't particularly advanced. In fact, by our standards, it's rather primitive. But its tactics." The advisor's voice trailed off. The Grand Admiral gestured impatiently with his primary manipulators. "Continue. They're using principles we considered too unreliable for warfare. The ship's captain, a human named Sarah Chen, has apparently specialized in what they call applied chaos theory at their military academy." The strategic display activated, showing footage from the battle. The CSS Trickster looked almost comically simple, a cylindrical core with modular attachments seemingly bolted on at random angles. As the Grand Admiral watched, the ship performed maneuvers that should have torn it apart. "That's not possible," he declared. "Those turns violate at least 3 laws of physics." "Actually, Excellence," another advisor spoke up, "they're exploiting something humans call edge cases, scenarios where multiple physical laws interact in unexpected ways. They're essentially surfing the boundaries between different physical principles." The footage continued. The Trickster was facing 3 Nexer heavy cruisers, each of which could have vaporized a small moon. Instead of engaging in proper combat, the human ship began deploying what looked like clouds of debris. "Are those mirrors?" The Grand Admiral's scales were now cycling through colors of disbelief. "Yes, Excellence. Thousands of small reflective surfaces, each programmed to move in apparently random patterns. When our targeting systems tried to compensate, they created a cascade of errors that—" The advisor paused, clearly embarrassed. "Our ships ended up targeting each other." The Grand Admiral watched as his mighty cruisers, confused by the chaotic light show, managed to disable each other's primary weapon systems. But that wasn't even the worst part. The Trickster had somehow managed to hack into their communication systems and was broadcasting something that the translator identified as early human internet memes. The psychological impact on our crews was significant, the first advisor admitted. Many reported experiencing something humans call cringe. "Surely our auxiliary weapons systems," the Grand Admiral began, "were rendered inoperable by what appears to be a modified mining foam. The humans call it space silly string. It's surprisingly effective at gumming up energy weapon ports." The Grand Admiral's scales settled into a uniform gray of resignation, and the colony they were defending. Completely intact, Excellence. The CSS Trickster suffered minimal damage, and the advisor checked her data stream. Captain Chen sent a message. She says, and I quote, "Thanks for helping us test our new defense systems. Would you like to subscribe to our newsletter?" In the silence that followed, the Grand Admiral realized something that sent a shiver through all of his appendages. This wasn't just a fluke victory by some clever humans. This was the beginning of something much worse. The humans had discovered that chaos itself could be a weapon, and they were frighteningly good at wielding it. "Send word to High Command," he ordered. "We need to reassess our entire strategic approach." And, he added with a resigned flutter of his wing membranes, "decline that newsletter subscription." Forcefully. As the advisors hurried to comply, the Grand Admiral watched the footage one more time. The CSS Trickster didn't look like a warship. It didn't fight like a warship. And that, he realized, was exactly what made it so dangerous. The humans had taken everything the Nexer Empire knew about warfare and turned it into a cosmic joke. And somewhere out there, Captain Sarah Chen was probably already thinking up something even more absurd for their next encounter. Murphy's Warriors. Captain Sarah Chen sat in her oddly shaped command chair aboard the CSS Trickster, drinking coffee from a mug labeled Chaos Coordinator. Her first officer, Commander James Murphy, was reviewing the latest intel reports with an expression that suggested either deep tactical insight or mild indigestion. "They're adapting," Murphy said, gesturing at the holographic display showing the approaching Nexer fleet. "Look at those formation patterns. They're trying to account for our mirror trick." Sarah grinned. "Good thing we're not planning to use that one again. How's Project Rubber Duck coming along?" "Engineering says it's ready." Murphy paused. "Though they want it noted that they still think this is, and I quote, completely batshit insane." "Noted and ignored," Sarah replied cheerfully. "What about the quantum probability manifolds?" "Dr. Zhang says they're as unstable as requested. Though she did ask if you're absolutely sure about this. According to her calculations, there's a non-zero chance we might accidentally turn the entire fleet into tropical fruit." "Perfect," Sarah said, taking another sip of coffee. "That's exactly the kind of uncertainty we're looking for." The Nexer fleet was impressive. 15 capital ships arranged in a formation specifically designed to counter the CSS Trickster's previous tactics. Their energy signatures suggested they'd modified their targeting systems to ignore reflective surfaces, and their communications were now heavily encrypted against mimetic warfare. "They really did their homework," Murphy observed. "They sure did," Sarah agreed. "They'd prepared for everything we did last time. But you know what they say about fighting the last war." She activated the ship-wide comm. "All hands. This is the captain. Initialize Operation Murphy's Law." The CSS Trickster's exterior began to shift, its modular sections rearranging themselves into what looked like a giant geometric puzzle gone wrong. The Nexer fleet's sensors would be going crazy trying to determine if it was expanding or contracting. Because thanks to Dr. Zhang's quantum probability manifolds, it was technically doing both at the same time. "Ready the ducks," Sarah ordered. From the Trickster's cargo bays emerged thousands of small yellow rubber objects. Each had been modified with tiny propulsion units and what the engineering team had dubbed quantum uncertainty enhancers. In classical physics, rubber ducks had no business affecting military-grade shields. But classical physics had given up and gone home the moment Dr. Zhang started playing with quantum probability. "Ducks away," Murphy reported. "And they're squeaking." The space between the Trickster and the Nexer fleet filled with a cosmic chorus of squeaks as thousands of rubber ducks began to vibrate at precisely the resonant frequency of standard Nexer shield harmonics. It was a frequency that the Nexer had discovered through centuries of scientific advancement. Humanity had discovered it by accident when someone dropped their phone in the bathtub. "Phase 2, Sarah commanded. "Release the probability waves." The quantum probability manifolds activated, creating zones where the laws of physics became more suggestions than rules. The rubber ducks, already operating on the edge of absurdity, began to exist in multiple states simultaneously. Some phased through shields as if they weren't there. Others appeared to travel backward in time. A few actually did turn into tropical fruit, much to Dr. Zhang's vindication. The Nexer fleet's formation began to break down as ships dealt with rubber ducks, materializing inside their engine rooms, temporal paradox alerts, and the inexplicable presence of pineapples in their ventilation systems. "Their flagship is hailing us," Murphy reported, trying to keep a straight face. "On screen," Sarah said, composing her features into what she hoped was a professional expression. The Nexer admiral appeared, his scales shifting through patterns that suggested extreme confusion and mild existential crisis. "What," he demanded, "are you doing to the fabric of reality?" "Testing some new defensive systems," Sarah replied blandly. "We find that quantum uncertainty pairs well with rubber ducks. Would you like to surrender now, or should we proceed to Phase 3? "What's Phase 3? The Admiral asked, unable to hide his apprehension. Sarah smiled. "We start playing with probability cascades. Did you know there's technically a non-zero chance that all your ships could simultaneously turn into classical music? Dr. Zhang is particularly interested in testing that theory." The Admiral's scales went completely white. "You wouldn't." "Oh, but we would. Humanity has a long and proud tradition of doing things specifically because someone said we wouldn't. I believe the technical term is hold my beer and watch this." Before the Admiral could respond, one of his secondary ships suddenly transformed into what appeared to be a perfect rendition of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, not just playing it, but physically becoming it. "Oops," Sarah said. "Looks like one slipped through." Probability mechanics can be so unpredictable. Now about that surrender. The Admiral's image vanished, replaced moments later by a general surrender signal. The remaining Nexer ships began a hasty retreat, leaving behind their musical companion, which was still thunderously proclaiming "DUN, DUN, DUN, DUN" into the void. "Should we turn it back?" Murphy asked. Sarah considered this. "Let's leave it for now. It adds a certain ambience, don't you think? Besides, I've always wanted to weaponize classical music." As the Trickster's crew began recovery operations on the quantum ducks, those that hadn't become fruit or spontaneously learned to tap dance, Sarah made a note in her log. Day 47. Successfully defended human space using rubber ducks, quantum mechanics, and classical music. Engineering still thinks we're insane. Dr. Zhang wants to try opera next time. Murphy suggests we're taking the chaos part of chaos theory a bit too literally. I maintain that if it's stupid but it works, it isn't stupid. She paused, then added, "Though I admit, explaining to command how we lost 3 rubber ducks to temporal paradox and gained 2 pineapples and a Wagner opera might be interesting." The art of chaos. The Galactic Council's emergency session was in its 4th hour, and first speaker Vix Terra was developing what humans would call a migraine. Her crystalline form pulsed with stress patterns as she observed the chaos unfolding in the grand chamber. "Order," she chimed, her harmonics cutting through the cacophony of alien languages. "We will have order in this chamber." The irony of demanding order during a discussion about human chaos warfare was not lost on her. A hologram dominated the center of the chamber, showing footage from recent encounters with human vessels. The CSS Trickster featured prominently, but it was no longer alone. Other human ships had begun adopting similarly unconventional tactics, each putting their own spin on Captain Chen's chaos theory approach to warfare. "The humans have weaponized improbability itself," declared the hive mind of Sector 7, its dozen representatives vibrating in unified distress. "Our predictive matrices are useless against them. Last week, one of their ships turned our entire battle swarm into a synchronized swimming competition." "At least your ships remain ships," grumbled Ambassador Thrix of the Silicon Consciousness. "Our automated fleet was transformed into what the humans called a flash mob performing something called Gangnam Style." Vix Terra's crystalline structure sparkled with suppressed amusement. She quickly composed herself as Ambassador Rodriguez of Earth took the floor. He was carrying what appeared to be a child's toy called a magic 8-ball, which he claimed helped him make diplomatic decisions. "Distinguished colleagues," Rodriguez began, casually shaking the 8-ball, "I understand your concerns, but I assure you everything is proceeding according to plan." He glanced at the toy. "Signs point to yes." "Plan." The word echoed through the chamber in various forms of incredulity. "Your ships are violating the laws of physics." "Technically," Rodriguez corrected, "we're just exploiting the fine print. Did you know there's nothing in the universal constants that explicitly forbids using quantum-entangled party streamers?" The footage shifted to show the CSS Trickster's latest engagement. The ship was now accompanied by the CSS Murphy's Law and the CSS Statistical Improbability. Together, they had introduced something called tactical interpretive dance to space warfare. "This is unprecedented," declared the Mechanical Concordat's representative. Our analysis shows that the humans are achieving strategic victories through methods that have a statistical probability of success approaching zero. Ah, Rodriguez smiled, but not actually zero. That's the key. As long as something isn't technically impossible, humans will find a way to make it work, usually in the most ridiculous way possible. The hologram showed Captain Chen's latest innovation, using modified weather control systems to create localized zones of what she called weaponized Murphy's Law. Inside these zones, anything that could go wrong for the enemy not only would go wrong, but would do so in the most embarrassing way possible. Yesterday, the Silicon Consciousness representative reported, one of these zones caused our flagship's AI to become convinced it was a stand-up comedian. It refused to engage in combat until it had finished its routine about binary code and relationships. Was it funny? Rodriguez asked, genuinely curious. That's not the point. The footage continued, showing the CSS statistical improbability, deploying what appeared to be a fleet of self-replicating origami cranes. The paper constructs somehow managed to fold spacetime itself, creating a series of geometric patterns that made several Nexar targeting computers crash after attempting to divide by zero. The humans aren't just fighting outside the box, observed the hive mind. They're pretending the box never existed and replacing it with a non-Euclidean sculpture of questionable taste. Speaking of taste, Rodriguez interjected, you should see what the CSS Murphy's Law is doing with modified food replicators. Turns out you can weaponize bad cafeteria food. Who knew? Vix Terra's crystalline form vibrated with concern. Ambassador Rodriguez, surely you must understand our position. The very fabric of space-time is being threatened by these innovations, Rodriguez suggested helpfully. Abominations, several voices chorused. The humans must be stopped before they completely destroy the established protocols of warfare, demanded Keithrix. Rodriguez consulted his magic 8-ball again. Outlook not so good, he reported. Look, here's the thing about humans and chaos. We don't create it. We just work with what's already there. The universe is naturally chaotic. We're just the first species to embrace that fact and turn it into an art form. The chamber erupted in fresh arguments as the footage showed the CSS trickster's latest experiment, using quantum-entangled bubble wrap to create temporary wormholes. The fact that the wormholes played Rick Astley's "Never Gonna Give You Up" was, Captain Chen had insisted, completely intentional. This isn't warfare, someone shouted. This is madness. Actually, Rodriguez corrected, checking his 8-ball one more time. This is humanity. The madness is just a bonus feature. Now, who'd like to see our plans for weaponized interpretive quantum physics? Dr. Zhang has some fascinating theories about using synchronized probability waves to turn enemy fleets into impromptu Broadway musicals. The resulting silence was broken only by the distant sound of Vixtera's crystalline form facepalming, a gesture she had, unfortunately, learned from spending too much time around humans. Symphony of mayhem. Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of uncertain quantum states, Captain Sarah Chen addressed the assembled commanders of humanity's Chaos Fleet. Welcome to Operation Symphony of Mayhem. The briefing room of the CSS Trickster had been modified to accommodate the various unconventional seating requirements of her fellow captains. Captain Rodriguez of the CSS Murphy's Law was sitting upside down, claiming it helped him think better. Captain Zhang of the CSS Statistical Improbability existed in 3 places simultaneously due to a probability experiment gone wonderfully wrong. The Nexar Empire has adapted to our individual tactics, Sarah continued, manipulating the holographic display. So we're going to show them what happens when we coordinate our chaos. Synchronized absurdity, suggested Rodriguez, still upside down. I like it. Precisely. Sarah brought up a tactical map showing the Nexar's primary defense fleet. They're expecting random acts of quantum weirdness. Instead, we're going to give them carefully orchestrated quantum weirdness. Dr. Zhang, if you would. One of the three Dr. Zhang stood up. The other two were busy proving Schrödinger wrong. We've developed what we're calling the chaos harmonic theory. By precisely timing our reality-bending effects, we can create a cascade of improbability that's actually predictable. To us, anyway. It's like conducting an orchestra, Sarah explained. Except instead of instruments, we're playing probability waves, quantum uncertainty, and weaponized pop culture references. The tactical display showed their fleet of 12 ships, each modified with its own unique brand of chaos-based technology. The CSS Trickster would lead with its quantum rubber ducks. The Murphy's Law would follow with its probability inversion fields. The statistical improbability would contribute its reality-folding origami. The CSS Random Number, Sarah indicated one of the newer ships, will deploy its arsenal of quantum-entangled memes. Captain Wei has somehow managed to weaponize cat videos. The internet was always a weapon, Wei noted. We just made it literal. Sarah continued through the fleet. The CSS paradox would create temporal loop zones where enemy ships would experience the same 15 seconds of baby shark repeatedly until they surrendered. The CSS glitch in the matrix specialized in creating localized zones where physics engines needed to be rebooted. And finally, Sarah gestured to their newest addition, the CSS Performance Art, captained by former interpretive dancer Maria Santiago, will coordinate our quantum ballet. I still can't believe we turned interpretive dance into a military tactic, Murphy commented from his inverted position. The Nexer can't believe it either, Santiago replied. That's why it works. Sarah brought up the mission timeline. We're calling this the Symphony of Mayhem because timing is everything. Each ship's chaos effect will build on the others, creating what Dr. Zhang calls a cascade of coordinated improbability. Think of it like a wave, one of the Zhangs explained while another calculated pi to the wrong number of digits on purpose. Each seemingly random event will amplify the next in a carefully orchestrated sequence. The plan was beautiful in its complexity. The trickster's quantum ducts would create zones of uncertainty that the Murphy's Law would transform into probability inversions. The statistical improbability would fold these zones into origami-like patterns of spacetime, which the random number would fill with weaponized memes. The performance art will use these effects as its stage, Santiago explained, demonstrating a particularly reality-bending pirouette. Our quantum ballet will transform the very fabric of space-time into what I like to call interpretive cosmic performance art. And the enemy fleet? Someone asked. If all goes according to plan, Sarah smiled, they'll become our unwitting chorus line. The quantum harmonics should transform their entire battle formation into a synchronized performance of the Nutcracker. There was a moment of silence as the assembled captains contemplated this. You know, Rodriguez mused, still upside down. A year ago, I would have said this was impossible. Now I'm just wondering if we can sell tickets. That's the beauty of it, Sarah said. We're not just breaking the laws of physics, we're making them dance to our tune. Literally. The briefing continued with detailed timing coordinations. Each ship's chaos effect had to be precisely calibrated to build on the others. The performance art would provide the underlying rhythm, the trickster's ducks would set the tempo, and the rest of the fleet would create a symphony of structured chaos that would make Einstein spin in his grave fast enough to power a small city. Remember, Sarah concluded, the key to this operation is coordination. Yes, we're using rubber ducks, quantum mechanics, and interpretive dance to wage war, but we're doing it with precision and purpose. What if something goes wrong? Wei asked. Then it's going exactly according to plan. All three Zhangs answered simultaneously. In quantum mechanics, the observer effect means everything's going wrong, and right at the same time until someone looks at it. Besides, Sarah added, we've got backup plans ranging from Plan B to Plan 0, and if those fail, we'll improvise. That's what humans do best. As the briefing concluded and the captains returned to their ships, Rodriguez having to be reminded which way was up. Sarah looked at the tactical display one last time. The Nexer Empire had no idea what was coming. A perfectly choreographed dance of impossible physics and improbable events, conducted by humans who had turned chaos itself into an art form. "Time to show the galaxy," she murmured. "That order isn't the only thing that can be coordinated. Victory through absurdity." The Nexer Grand Admiral watched in mounting horror as the human fleet approached. His tactical display was already beginning to distort, reality itself seeming to warp around the incoming ships. The CSS Trickster led the formation, if you could call it a formation. It looked more like a cosmic dance troupe having an existential crisis. "Excellence," his second-in-command reported, scales shifting through patterns of confusion. "We're detecting multiple quantum anomalies. They're harmonizing." Harmonizing. The Grand Admiral's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. "What do you mean, harmonizing?" The answer came not from his officer, but from space itself. The human fleet began to move in perfect synchronization, their chaos effects building upon each other in ways that shouldn't have been possible. The CSS Trickster's quantum ducts emerged first, but instead of their usual random patterns, they were moving in perfect formation, leaving trails of probability distortion in their wake. "By the first egg," someone whispered, "they've weaponized synchronized swimming." The CSS Murphy's Law followed, its probability inversion fields transforming the duct-created distortions into complex geometric patterns. The CSS Statistical Improbability, all 3 versions of it, began folding these patterns like cosmic origami, creating spaces where mathematics itself went on holiday. "They're targeting our fleet formations," the tactical officer reported, "but not with weapons. They're using is that interpretive dance." The CSS Performance Art had taken center stage, its quantum ballet transforming space-time into what could only be described as a cosmic performance piece. The Nexer ships found themselves unwittingly incorporated into the choreography, their precise military formations dissolving into what looked suspiciously like a galactic chorus line. "Get us out of here," the Grand Admiral ordered. "We can't, Excellence. Our engines are." The officer paused, checking readings in disbelief. "They're in a quantum superposition of running backwards and doing the cha-cha." The CSS Random Number unleashed its barrage of weaponized memes, perfectly timed to the rhythm of the cosmic ballet. Reality began glitching in time to what humans called viral videos, each distortion building upon the last in a carefully orchestrated crescendo of chaos. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the CSS Trickster," a transmission cut through the chaos. "Your fleet is now part of our performance art piece, titled The Improbability of Traditional Warfare in a Post-Duck Universe. Would you like to surrender, or should we proceed to the interpretive quantum physics portion of our program?" Before the Grand Admiral could respond, the CSS glitch in the Matrix activated its reality warping fields. The space around the Nexer fleet began to buffer like an ancient streaming video, complete with a loading icon made of quantum-entangled rubber ducks. "What are you doing to the laws of physics?" the Grand Admiral demanded. "Oh, we're not breaking them," Chen replied cheerfully. "We're just teaching them to dance. Dr. Zhang has some fascinating theories about the rhythmic potential of quantum mechanics. Would you like a demonstration?" The entire Nexer fleet suddenly found itself part of a perfectly synchronized performance of The Time Warp from the Rocky Horror Picture Show, their ships moving in ways that made their navigation computers weep. "This is impossible," the Grand Admiral protested. "Improbable," corrected Chen. "There's a difference. Impossible means it can't be done. Improbable just means you need enough rubber ducks and a sufficiently creative interpretation of quantum physics." The CSS Paradox chose that moment to create its temporal loop zones, causing sections of the Nexer fleet to experience multiple versions of the same moment, each version slightly more absurd than the last. Ships began to exist in quantum superpositions of various dance moves from human history. "Excellence," the tactical officer reported. "Our flagship is currently doing the Macarena in 4 different dimensions, simultaneously." The Grand Admiral watched as his mighty fleet, the pride of the Nexer Empire, was transformed into what humans would call a flash mob performance of galactic proportions. Each attempt to counter the humans' tactics only resulted in their ships being incorporated into increasingly elaborate dance numbers. "Enough," he finally declared. "This is not warfare. This is art," Chen suggested. Specifically, a groundbreaking fusion of quantum mechanics, interpretive dance, and tactical rubber duck deployment. We call it postmodern probability combat. It's very avant-garde. The Grand Admiral looked at his fleet, those ships that weren't currently trapped in temporal tap dance loops or performing quantum ballet. His mighty dreadnoughts were being conducted like an orchestra by a human ship that looked like it had been designed by a committee of chaos theorists on caffeine. "Why?" he asked finally. "Why wage war like this?" "Because anyone can destroy," Chen replied, her voice suddenly serious. "It takes true creativity to defend through controlled chaos. We're not trying to defeat you. We're trying to show you that there's more than one way to resolve conflicts. Sometimes the best defense is a good choreography." As if to emphasize her point, the entire human fleet executed a perfect quantum pirouette, their chaos effects harmonizing in ways that made reality itself stand up and applaud. The Grand Admiral looked at his fleet, still caught in various stages of involuntary performance art. He looked at the human ships, conducting their symphony of structured chaos with obvious joy. He looked at his tactical display, which was now showing probability curves in the shape of duck constellations. "We surrender," he said finally, "on one condition." "Yes, teach us." And that was how the Nexer Empire, one of the most militaristic civilizations in the galaxy, ended up establishing the first intergalactic institute of quantum performance art and tactical improbability studies. Captain Sarah Chen was invited to be a guest lecturer, though the rubber ducks were required to sign liability waivers first. As for the CSS Trickster and its fleet, they continued to defend human space through increasingly creative applications of chaos theory, proving that in a universe of infinite possibilities, the most effective strategy might just be embracing the improbable. After all, as Chen liked to say, in a quantum universe, anything is possible, especially if you have enough rubber ducks and a good sense of rhythm.